Charlie. That's a wonderful introduction. Really nice to see everybody here. We just passed 200 participants. I don't know if that's a lot or a little, but I'll assume it's a lot. Wonderful to be invited to speak to all of you. And like Rabbi Charlie said, I'll be back next month wearing a different hat. Right now I'm wearing my UAE hat, and next month I'll be back with my Jewanced Podcast hat, where we'll be hosting a live podcast episode for you guys. Let me do a share screen here, and then we can get going. All right. Can everybody see that?
Yes. The only thing is perfect. Now it's perfect. Thanks.
All right. Okay. So we're going to be taking kind of a virtual tour of the United Arab Emirates, and I'll tell you a little bit how I got connected to this whole story. Of course, the Abraham Accords, maybe the bright spot of what has otherwise been a very difficult year for all of us around the world. I'm not a tour guide by any means of the word, but I'm certainly not from the UAE. My experience there is new and growing all the time, but I want to take you on a journey into the Abraham Accords. So I won't repeat the very nice introduction that Rabbi Charlie gave of me. What I will say is in the past week, adding a new line, and hopefully something that will become an important part of my life, and that's I'm the incoming vice president of Sharaka, which is a new NGO looking to bolster people-to-people relations, the normalization between Israel and the UAE, and through Israel and the UAE to the entire Arab world. So it's an exciting new organization. I'll talk about it a little later. You can find more of me, and I'll give all this information at the end, on my website, danfeferman.com. You are welcome to friend me on Facebook, where I post regular articles and analyses and insights, on Twitter, where I post less. And of course, you can follow the Jewanced Podcast. I'd be glad if you did that. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter, and any podcast program, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, etc. So what are we doing today? We're going to have a brief history overview and tour of the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. We're going to talk about the Abraham Accords and their importance. We'll talk a little bit about tips for the first-time tourist to the UAE, and everything goes according to schedule with coordinating with the other side of the world. We will have a conversation with my dear friend from the UAE, Ms. Alanud Al-Hashmi, who is also my colleague, my new colleague in Sharaka. So let's get going. The first time that's me, by the way, at a camel race in the UAE. So the first time I gave this talk, actually for Park Avenue Synagogue, Charlie, when you invited me to speak, it was just in March. And the UAE's first ambassador to Israel had been sworn in, received by President Rivlin. And it was a historic day as the UAE national anthem was being played at the presidential residence in Jerusalem. Since then, we've had a number of firsts, major firsts: flights landing, ambassadors exchanged, government cooperation, academic exchanges, business deals being made day by day, sports teams playing each other, cultural cooperation. The list really goes on and on. I feel like we've had so many wonderful firsts, and they keep coming. Back in July, I'm going to take you back almost a year to July 2020, when I was asked to join this group of civic and business leaders called the UAE-Israel Business Council. That was my UAE journey had just began, and it's really been kind of a whirlwind love affair. I've had such a fascinating experience. Of course, as Charlie mentioned, by training and by profession, I'm a Middle East scholar. I do speak some Arabic. It's not as good as I'd like it to be, but given where Israel's relations with the Arab world had been, I never really thought it would be any more than being an analyst or defense analyst or commentator on the news or things like that. And as soon as the accords were announced, really to our surprise, I was one of the first Israelis to openly travel to the UAE. I have an American passport, and so I was able to get there even a little ahead of the rest of the Israelis. And I didn't go for business. I didn't go for pleasure. It was somewhere in the middle to really deeply get to know the culture of the people, to get to know the people. And of course, this was during COVID, so everything was made complex. Over the past year, I have spent countless hours on Zooms, meetings, visits to the UAE, hosting. So far, the only delegation that's been able to come because of COVID, but hopefully now more will be able to come. I've made so many friends, I can't even count them anymore. People I truly consider close friends. And I'm part of a few forums that I mentioned: social media, influencers, policy advisors, academics. So my interests have kind of ranged across a broad swath of UAE society. And I didn't think that something that was so not a part of my life could so quickly become a part of my life. This week, like I mentioned, I begin a new position and adventure with Sharaka. I'll be dealing there with communications, with creating content, international initiatives. And I'll actually open this to the 212 people viewing. If your community wants to invite us as Sharaka, either individuals from Sharaka, from the UAE, from Bahrain, from Israel, or a delegation that we're going to be sending around the United States later this summer, which will include, actually, we're not even going to send any Jews. It's going to include Emirati Arabs, Muslims, Israeli Arab Muslims, and a Palestinian to go around and talk about the Abraham Accords and the normalization from their perspective. And so if you'd be interested, and again, I'll say this all at the end, in hosting this delegation in your community later this summer, please do get in touch with me, and my information will come up again at the end. Now, before I jump into this, oftentimes when people think of the UAE, especially Dubai, Abu Dhabi, they think of the wealth, or they think of the crazy feats of architecture, the Burj Khalifa, right, the tallest building in the world. And of course, those are all amazingly impressive. It's an impressive country. But what impressed me the most, and why I think I'm so connected to this story, it's the story of the UAE. And this is what I've been trying to unlock. It's what I hope to share with you. And I think we Jews in Israel and around the world, I think we have a lot in common with them. We are old peoples. We respect our traditions very much so. We respect our families, but we're forward-looking. We're optimistic. We're positive. We don't get drained in and stuck to our past. We invest a lot in education. We prize innovation while respecting and honoring family and tradition. So it's a rare, I think, a unique combination that doesn't exist, I don't think, in any other part of the Middle East, and maybe not really too many parts of the world. We also prize tolerance, at least some parts of us do, as we saw in the last election here. We prize openness. We have humble beginnings. We live in hostile parts of the world, and yet both of our countries, both of our peoples have managed to achieve some really fantastic achievements. So if I'm able to leave you with one thing, it's this understanding. It's okay. So I don't want to talk about, the oil wealth or all these kind of things, or the sheikhs and the billionaires, and that's all cool too. But it's the story of a people who built what is truly, I think, a fantasy land 30 years in the future. One of the most impressive places I've ever been, through hard work, through innovation, through foresight, while all being grounded to their past. So let's go on this journey together. We have a lot of slides. I'm going to skip through some of them. Some of them are just to give you visual ideas of where we're going. And I'll also stop here and there just briefly for questions, and I'll let you in your own minds, or if you want to put it in the chat function, if you're quick enough to try to answer. So this is the map of the greater Middle East area, and the United Arab Emirates is right there. Anyone in the chat function, and maybe Charlie, if you want to just keep an eye on the chat, anyone want to take a guess? If you had to compare the UAE to one of the states in the United States, how big would you try to guess it would be? So I'll give a few seconds for people who want to try to throw their answer in the chat function, or just think about it to yourself, or talk about it.
I'm waiting for the answers in the chat. So let's, we have Vermont from Jennifer Melvin. Catherine Scher wrote Texas. William Gottfried, Vermont. Tony Bernstein, Texas. Wow, we have a Texas-Vermont thing on. Neil Eisenberg wrote New Jersey.
Okay, so New Jersey would be about
Kansas,
the size of Israel.
Or New Jersey as well. Elaine Langer just wrote New York. Miriam Harris wrote Ohio.
So we've got a good stretch of guesses all the way from New Jersey to Texas. So this is one map I could find comparing the size of the UAE to the United States, and you can see it's probably about the size of Maryland, maybe a little bigger than Maryland, about the size of Virginia. So some of our guesses were pretty close on. Okay, so now two more questions as we move on real quickly into the lightning round. Who can guess the population of the United Arab Emirates? And who can guess how many Emirates there are? Charlie, you already know the answers, so make sure you don't tell anybody.
This is sort of like Jeopardy. This is so fun.
All right. The winner will get a barrel of oil sent to their house.
Deb Schubach wrote 37. In Beth Broadway wrote 5 Emirates, 2 million people. Jan Court wrote C3 Emirates. Let's wait to see if anybody else. Tom Barth wrote 10 million. Debbie Pollack wrote 5 Emirates. William Gottfried wrote 10 million. All right, listen, if you use Google, we'll find out.
That's
all
right.
Dan,
No
what's
using
the answer?
So there are, as you can see, about 7 Emirates. And an emirate is very much like a state. They have a federal system, and it works very much like the United States, the United Arab Emirates, the United States of America. Same idea. There are 7 of them. And the largest one and the main one that holds the capital is Abu Dhabi. Dubai will be the most populous one, and then Sharjah, and then the rest of them are quite small. You can see in a second. There's Ajman, there's Kaywan, Ras Al Khaimah, and Fujairah. And so these are the 7 Emirates, and here you can see their population totals. So Abu Dhabi, or Dubai is over 4 million residents. Okay, Abu Dhabi has close to 3, Sharjah has over 2, and then the rest of them are considerably smaller, both in size and in population. So these are the 7 Emirates that make up the United Arab Emirates. Now let's talk very quickly about the history of the UAE. It's an interesting history, and again, those of you who know Israel's history might see some comparisons. So they came together as a union, as a federation in 1971. 6 of the 7 came together, and then Ras Al Khaimah joined them a year later. They actually told me that other Gulf countries, Bahrain and Qatar and Oman, were all invited to join and become part of the United Emirates, and they decided to remain independent countries. The founding father, their Ben Gurion, so to speak, okay, their George Washington, is this gentleman here in the middle, and that is Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, very lovingly known in the UAE as Sheikh Zayed. He was the first president of the UAE. He's really revered as the father of the nation, and you feel it talking to every single person you will meet in that country, and it's an admiration and adoration that people give to a father or a grandfather, depending on how old you are and if you remember him, or if you were a child. He passed away in 2004. He was succeeded by his eldest son, Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed, who is the current president, but he's kind of out of the public eye, and we'll talk about the next leadership in a second. What I would encourage people to do is go, don't just go to the touristy sites, but go to learn about the heritage. So I was able on just 2 weeks ago to go to the Sheikh Zayed Memorial in Abu Dhabi. And it's a wonderful memorial. All sorts of people. There's a video in kind of the main room where all sorts of people who knew him talk about him and his legacy. And this is incredible. So this is the actual memorial itself. And every inch of this outdoor, it's almost like a park memorial type thing in the middle of downtown Abu Dhabi. It's a 3D statue made from special rocks, special minerals. And if you look very carefully, Charlie, can you see this? If you look very carefully, what do you see here?
It looks like an image.
It is.
In the rocks, yeah.
It's a 3D image of Sheikh Zayed. There you can see his eyes, his mouth. You can see the headdress, okay, and the beard. And it's only if you look at certain angles you can see this 3D sculpture. It's composed of thousands of rocks meticulously placed in the right places, and the whole place is so carefully constructed and engineered to honor the legacy of Sheikh Zayed. Every tree is not an accident. The type of tree, the placing of the tree are all an homage to his environmental vision. He was a huge environmentalist. Every plant, every type of species of plant is meant to recreate the environmental vision, the coexistence that he had for his country, to live with the environment and not rule the environment. The water features in this memorial, it's really quite stunning. In Dubai, make sure, please, to see the Etihad Museum. It's a wonderful museum. This is my picture. It's not the best one, but I'll show you their picture in a second. And this is a museum. Etihad means unity. So this is the museum of the founding of the modern UAE. Anyone have a guess what this picture resembles? What is the building? What is the architecture meant to resemble? Anyone have? Can anyone venture a guess?
We have someone said a face.
A face, okay. Any other guesses?
Looks like sort of looks like a note. Looks like something written. And someone wrote here a whale. Someone wrote a bird's wing. Someone wrote, it looks like Connecticut, which good as anything. Maybe that was from before.
Yeah, so we can, all those could have symbolic meanings. It's meant to look like a manuscript. So think like a document, a constitution, okay? And that's what it really is. And it's kind of a folded over sheet of paper is what the architects designed it for. It was opened in 2017 in Dubai, not in Abu Dhabi. And each of the pillars that you can see here, there are 7 pillars, and each of them is meant to be one of the pens used to sign the declaration of formation of the Federation back in 1971. Wonderful museum. You can see calligraphy, writings, thoughts of Sheikh Zayed. There I'm taking a tour of it. There you can see here's Sheikh Zayed, and here are the other founding, the other founding emirs. And here's the original flagpole, and the round table where they all sat as equals to sign this. And I'll take you, just while we're on the subject of Sheikh Zayed, I want to take you to one last place that I had the true pleasure of seeing. This is Kasir Al-Watan, otherwise known as the Palace of the Nation in Abu Dhabi. It is Charlie, I don't even know. To say a magnificent structure, I think, is underselling this thing. It is one of the most stunning feats of architecture and design I've ever seen in my life. I've traveled a little bit. I haven't seen the entire world, but I've certainly seen parts of the world. And actually, a lot of my Emirati friends, because it opened right before COVID, hadn't had a chance to see it themselves. So I actually have seen this before many of my my Emirati friends. It is the official palace for dignitaries, for royal events. Nobody actually lives there. I won't take you on a full tour of it, but you can, the size of it, the grandeur, you can see the level of detail, every little inch, every design, every piece of marble, every craftsman is so thought out. It was stunning and it was mind-blowing. But why did I bring this up here? Is because as you take a tour of this, you run across this gold sculpture, and it's massive. I mean, 5, 6, 7 people can walk inside of that at the same time, just so you understand how big it is. And it's, if you can look closely, it's calligraphy, and it is a quote attributed to Sheikh Zayed. And I won't read the Arabic and butcher the pronunciation, but what it says is, wealth is not money and oil. Wealth lies in people, and it is worthless if not dedicated to serve the people. And so this is something that really struck me. It's the narrative that this country has built for itself. And of course, there are many countries in the Middle East, throughout Africa, throughout parts of the world that have natural resources, and you see how well it turns out for them. And here you see a country that was blessed with natural resources, and its leadership, Sheikh Zayed and the early leaders, had the foresight, being uneducated Bedouins who came out of a tribal warrior culture in the desert, to have the foresight to invest in education, to make sure that the people live well, that the people are taken care of. And I'll talk about the culture of tolerance and openness and all these things later on. But the very first thing is that, it seemed, and of course the leadership lives very well. They're all billionaires. And they live very comfortable lives. But to make sure that the people enjoy the successes of the natural resources that they were blessed with, which you don't see in many parts of the world, and that they invested it in education. And it's an amazing thing to see. It's inspirational, and you see why the people adore their leadership, and especially the founding father, Sheikh Zayed, so much. And so you see pictures of him everywhere, you see quotes attributed to him everywhere. And that spirit very much lives on in the country, and it's very impressive. This gentleman right here. Yeah, go ahead.
If we can go back just for 1 second, I just want to ask you, the outdoors and indoors are really magnificent, but it seems like there was no one else there. Was that because of when you went to visit, COVID, or what's going on?
Yeah, it was a combination of a number of things. First, we went there at the very end of the day. So we kind of had the whole place to ourselves. We were the last people, I think, in line to get in. Secondly, it was fewer tourists come to Abu Dhabi than Dubai. It's also the end of the tourist season. It was, when I was there, 50 degrees Celsius and humid outside. So for those who are not familiar with Celsius, it was 120 Fahrenheit and humid. So people are not touring so much. And of course, the UAE has been open to tourism throughout the entire COVID period, but of course, far fewer tourists come. But yes, normally we were very lucky to have certainly timed this picture all by ourselves. There were very few people there, and it was we were very lucky to have that.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, so this is the current leader of the UAE, and he's not the most well-known figure outside of the Middle East. People in the Middle East certainly know who he is, and he is known as MBZ. And this is the New York Times last year calling him the most powerful Arab ruler and probably one of the most powerful political leaders, national leaders in the world. He does it very quietly and very modestly. So Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, I believe he's the third son of Sheikh Zayed, and he is the de facto ruler of Abu Dhabi, the de facto the vice president, and the ruler of the armed forces. And he has orchestrated. Would it be possible to mute? We're getting some background noise from other places here. We can mute make sure everyone else is muted. So he has been leading very quietly, very cautiously, very thought out, an activist, interventionist foreign policy. There we go.
You accidentally got muted there. Okay.
I accidentally got muted too. So Sheikh MBZ, as he's very affectionately known, has been leading this quiet campaign of real leadership in the region. We'll talk about this when we get to the Abraham Accords, because the Abraham Accords is part of it. But he is behind the scenes throughout the entire region, battling against, whether militarily or financially or ideologically, Islamist radical movements throughout the region. And therefore, he's one of the most important, certainly, I think, leaders in the Arab world today. And apparently, he's a very modest guy. He likes to stay out of the public, out of the limelight. And he's been known to randomly walk into restaurants and shake hands, or, he's an avid, jogger, cyclist. So people will randomly run into him on the streets, and people can go up to him and say hi. And he's very open to the public, very, very warm and welcoming figure. When you're in Dubai, this is another picture that you will see everywhere. And this is the ruler of Dubai and the vice president of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. And this gentleman is largely credited with the vision for Dubai's growth into a global hub of finances, of logistics, of business, of tourism. He's behind the launch of some of the major enterprises, Emirates Airlines, one of the best in the world, DP World, the Jumeirah Group. He's overseen the construction and the vision behind the free zones, the economic free zones, and a lot of the reforms that have been incredibly welcoming to foreigners, to tourists, to foreign businesses. A lot of the unbelievable infrastructure projects that we'll have a peek at later on, such as the Palm Islands or the Burj Arab Hotel or the Burj Khalifa, are credited to Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. So this is the other major figure, and these are kind of the two major faces you'll see. Most tourists, let's be honest, don't really go there, although there is a lot to see outside of the rest of the country. Most people rarely see anything outside of Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And
let me just ask one question that came up, Dan, which is what is an economic free zone? And I hope it means that they're giving out money, but if you can explain that, that would be great.
That's exactly it. An economic free zone is something developed by the UAE. It sits physically inside of the UAE, but it is international territory for businesses kind of halfway set up in the UAE and be able to operate and have the full logistical, financial, legal, the full package of everything a business needs to set up without really being inside of the UAE. So physically it's there. It could be either offshore or in the UAE, but it's not, it has its own rules and regulations and limitations, and it's to attract businesses to set up in the UAE and all the corporate structure and all the people who would work for those corporations and to come and live in the UAE, but it has its own rules and regulations. Although now foreigners can 100% own businesses. These are new rules and regulations in the UAE. Before they would do these in these free zones. So it's just another very innovative way for the government to try to attract more and more foreign workers, corporations, businesses, what have you. And it's worked. It's worked very successfully. So
we got a question.
Yeah,
if this is really an opportunity for the government to avoid taxes, is that
yeah, they don't pay taxes, or I don't know exactly how the corporate taxes work. People don't pay income tax, for example, in the UAE, which is something shocking given they're able to offset that right now with the natural wealth. But yeah, it has also to do with taxes and avoiding, how do you attract people so they don't have to pay, the corporations don't have to pay taxes, but still set up in your territory. So that's kind of one of these financial structures that I don't 100% understand.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things you'll notice immediately, certainly in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi, it looks like you're in the future. I mean, this is a picture. Actually, looks a lot like where the hotel I was staying at last time. It's not my picture, but it looks like you're in the future. But really, not so long ago, the country looked very different, and the level of development is astounding. By the way, I got to say, it's the cleanest, safest, most efficient bureaucracy, infrastructure, most modern infrastructure I've ever seen in my life. It's truly like stepping 30 years into a very positive future. So not, not a dystopian future like you might see in some movies, but not so long ago, this is 1970. So you can see Abu Dhabi just in 1970 versus now. Okay. You can see the level of development in this country. I have friends, any of my friends who are over 40 can tell me, how magnificently fast this country has transformed. So these are pictures really from not that long ago. This is Sheikh Zayed, or this is when the Queen of England visited and, driving around, and you still see Bedouins on their camels. So for example, you can see the Dubai Clock Tower, which is, then and now. You can see what was around it and what it looked like. Or the Corniche in Abu Dhabi, which is just a stunning place to visit. The Jebel Ali port, one of the largest, busiest, and most advanced seaports, logistics ports in the world. Okay, and this was cool. So this is when I was standing at the Sheikh Zayed Memorial. This is my picture. This is the ADNOC is the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. This is the national company that took care of the oil resources for Abu Dhabi. This is the original building. So then when this was built, sometime around in the 70s, this was the largest building in Abu Dhabi. Okay. And now this is the modern building. And they purposefully kept the original building next to the new building as a reminder to themselves of how far they've come. And it's truly magnificent to see this progress, to see this development. And I guess kind of like how we have here in Israel, where we joke and say that the national bird is the crane. They have a similar joke over there in the UAE. So while we're here, I just want to show you some of the magnificent architecture and the stunning buildings, because we talked about the then and the now. And as I move on to the next part, I want to just take you on a very quick tour of some of the magnificent architecture in Abu Dhabi. This is the Burj Khalifa, tallest building in the world. It is shocking. I've seen the Sears Tower in Chicago. I've been in downtown New York. I've never seen anything like this. And it's a stunning building too. So when you walk around this downtown Dubai, you just see some of the architecture. These are government buildings too, some of them, hotels, government buildings. This is the very magnificent Dubai fountain show every night outside the Dubai Mall in Dubai Creek. Very Vegas-like. I've never actually been to Vegas, but that's what I'm told. So very, something cool to see every half hour or so when you're in Dubai. And this was just something cool I stumbled on as I was walking through a government building. It's the Ministry of Possibilities. And this is, I love these kind of things. When I travel, these are the kind of things I pay attention to. And this isn't a tourist thing. It's in the middle of a hotel, little shopping plaza. But you see this, the Ministry of Possibilities, a virtual ministry created to incubate and solve the systemic impossibilities of government. And you see these kind of things, these little kind of things all over the UAE. And it just gives you a window into what kind of society they are. They're problem solvers. They're pragmatic. They're visionaries. They're not afraid to think 20 years ahead. They're not afraid to try, different kinds of experiments and different kinds of solutions. So when I saw this, you should always stop. If you're going to take a picture of anything in the UAE, you need to ask permission, certainly government infrastructure. And I went inside and asked if I could take a picture, and they very graciously allowed me to. But I thought this was fantastic. And this is still under construction, but hopefully when all of you come to visit, you'll be able to see it. It's the Museum of the Future, and it's connected to the Dubai Future Foundation. This is a museum, and it actually goes even further, more underground, and it's dedicated to their understanding of the future as they know it today and looking ahead 5-10 years. Can anyone take a guess about the design of this building, what it's meant to symbolize? Any guesses? Any architects or people?
We have a couple of things. Someone wrote, I think this was Jay Frank and Gail wrote, it's infinity. Someone wrote, it's an I. That would be Jesse Kleinman. Eve Dixon said, it looks like a bagel. Deb Shoebox said, it's the past and the future. Miriam Harris said, it's an egg. It's a Mobius strip. That's Alan Palmer and also Edward Lacker. And Sandy Pearl wrote The Circle of Life, which, by the way, I think that's another movie, The Lion King. And that's what we got. Yeah.
I love all those answers. So
yes, it's a really creative group, a really fantastic group.
So according to the architects, the void represents that we do not yet know. And so it's the people who will seek the unknown, will continue to innovate and discover to help guide humanity towards a better future. So that's what the architects had in mind. So a lot of the answers were pretty close. So you can see, and parts of this already exist in the next building, the building next to it, and then the rest of it will soon open, I think in the next year or so. You can just see some of the stunning, again, architectural designs in that part of the city, and it's just really cool to walk around. This, of course, is a different part of Dubai. While I'm here, just to give you an idea of the beauty of this city, make sure to check out the Dubai Marina, which really, it's kind of like a different city. It's about a half an hour away, but it's technically within Dubai. Lovely neighborhood, a lot of businesses, a lot of hotels, restaurants, apartments, shops, and it's just the newer, hip part of the city. But really, the city is just blossoming like crazy.
But can I ask a question? Is this beautiful waterway, is this what's man-made, or is this natural?
So to my understanding, it is natural, and then they, of course, worked around it to, build up the sides and the banks and perhaps widen it. But it is a natural waterway of a natural marina. And the previous one with the fountain show, although it was man-altered, it is the Dubai Creek, which is a natural body of water that led from, I'm not sure if it led into the sea inlands or the other way around, but it is originally a natural body of water that was expanded. And of course, the edges are now concrete and etc. But to my understanding, they were original. So before we move on to the next part, I mentioned this at the beginning. Does anyone have a guess as to what we call people who are native to the UAE? If anyone want to throw on a guess onto the chat function.
We're waiting for them.
Emiratis.
So somebody guessed correctly.
Me, Rona.
Thank you, Rona.
So thank you, Rona. Fantastic.
You're welcome.
Yes. So the natives of the UAE are called Emiratis. Emiratis, the United Arab Emirates. And this is a mind-blowing fact, but out of the 10 million, we asked this earlier, the 10 million people who live in the UAE, only about 1 million of them are citizens. The rest are foreign workers, and that's not including the tourists. So the native language is a Gulf dialect, an Emirati dialect of Arabic, which, as I found out, and after taking many years of Arabic, is quite different than all the other dialects of Arabic. So my Arabic is my very mediocre Arabic doesn't help me too much in the UAE because I speak a mix of classical Arabic with some Palestinian dialect. I know a little bit of Iraqi slang because my grandparents are, excuse me, Iraqi originally. So I picked up a little bit of Jewish Iraqi slang. They speak an Arabic Gulf dialect, although English is incredibly widely spoken and at very high levels because 90% of the country are foreigners. So it's actually the common language for most people. Anyone who is, let's say, upper middle class, which is a lot of the country, attend private schools, and many, many study in foreign universities. The official religion is Sunni Islam, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. I found an incredibly open and tolerant, we'll call it a version of Islam, practiced in the UAE. I don't know if they have a name for it yet, but I would compare it a lot like what we would call modern Orthodox Judaism or conservative Judaism, as opposed to what we see in other parts of the Middle East and the Muslim world, where we talk about, kind of more a fundamentalist approach to religion. Very open, very modern approach, very self-critical, very historically aware, able to look at things from a scholarly lens, while at the same time, again, being traditional people. The traditional dress that you will see, very common around the country, is what you can see these people wearing. And it does not mean that they are more or less religiously observant. This is a common misperception, including one that I had. It's very much just the cultural norm to dress like this in public. So men, this is called a Kandura. And then the headdress, which can be white, it can be checkered, it can be red, it can be many different colors. And also this doesn't have to be white. This can also be different colors. This is called a Kandura. This is called a Ghitra, and that's called an Agal. And then women will traditionally wear an abaya and a shela over Western clothes. Of course, people can wear whatever they want. They don't have to wear this, but they often do out of comfort, out of tradition, etc. Western clothes, both for Emiratis and, of course, for foreigners, are perfectly acceptable in any situation. The only thing is if you are a government employee or in kind of any official capacity representing the country, then you do need to dress in traditional clothes. Many people, I will say, are what we would consider affluent. We might consider them upper middle class. And yet, despite this and despite their wealth, they are incredibly humble. They're incredibly gracious. You never feel it lorded over anybody in any kind of way. And they deeply, deeply value relationships that are built over a long time based on trust. And they are incredibly hospitable people. Every house I was hosted in, I was just amazed by the level of traditional hospitality that I received. It's really a wonderful tradition and welcoming. Of course, the first time I was there, my dear friends had to take me to get tailored and fitted for a Kandura. And they joke that I look like one of the locals. But these are all tailor-made, and you'll see Emirati men will have 20 of them, 30 of them tailor-made in their closet that they take to get dry cleaned. So this is this is how this works here. Of course,
I think you look great. It's a wonderful look for you, and we're
thank you.
From the CSP that you'll bring one for everybody. It's
well, when you come to visit, Charlie, we'll have to get you tailored for one.
I'm in, and we'll bring Ari. I'm sure he'd like one very much. we're getting a lot of questions, if we
Yeah.
can, about the position of women in the UAE in terms of, do they have to cover their faces or their hair? Can they drive? Are they allowed to work? What's their situation with education? And then I know there's a situation with Princess Lafita, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So I don't know if this is the right time to bring that in, but there's been a lot of questions about it, and I just want to make sure it's on your radar.
Sure. So I'll answer quickly, and I'm hoping I coordinated correctly with our guest who should log on any moment now. So if we notice that our friend Alanud logs on, she'll be able to answer personally those questions about Emirati women. I'll say from my perspective, of course, as a foreign man, and from my many conversations with women, they are completely equal, completely open and allowed to do anything, certainly by law. Of course, it is by Western standards, it would be a slightly more conservative culture, but certainly as far as jobs, as far as education, as far as driving, as far as wearing whatever they want, it is an unbelievably open culture, an unbelievably egalitarian culture. Senior government positions are over 50% women, and they are quite empowered. They're quite empowered. I actually had dinner with the sister of one of my dear friends, who is the Arab world's first female fighter pilot. She's a colonel in the UAE Air Force, and she's on the traditional side of things, but I think even more than Israel. I don't know what is in the U.S., but she talks about how now, after she broke the barriers, female fighter pilots is a very common thing. I saw plenty of female policewomen, soldiers serving alongside men. Like I said, I had interactions with many powerful CEOs. Our guest, who will hopefully join us, is the CEO of a company herself and has held high-level government positions, and now she is the deputy CEO of Sharaka in the UAE. So I was stunned by the level of equality and empowerment for women in that country. So I'll give you I'll give you a quick tour, a quick food tour before we get to the other parts here. So one of my dear friends over there is I only found out she's sort of on the level of a princess after I met her. I didn't know that, but she is a foodie, a cultural influencer, and she was actually learning Hebrew before the Abraham Accords and had very warm connections with the Jewish community. And she is working on a kosher cookbook, taking Emirati cuisine and adapting it to kosher laws, which she knows better than most Jews I know. She can also read from the Siddur and regularly participates in Jewish communal events as a friend of the Jewish community. So she took me out for an Emirati food day. Now, they don't have a lot of local Emirati foods, and certainly I don't eat non-kosher meat, so I was a little limited, but she took me out for a traditional Emirati breakfast. So this is what it looked like. These are some traditional foods. So this is a vermicelli noodles hinted with saffron with an omelet. They have a version of shakshuka, which if you've been to Israel, you know what that is. And then, a lot of different kinds of white cheeses, beans, fava beans, chickpeas, etc. So that's a traditional breakfast, but this is their traditional drink. So yes, they have Arabic coffee, which, by the way, is very different than Turkish coffee. I found out it's more cardamom and ginger and less coffee, so it's very thin. But this is actually their national drink, which is called karak chai, and it is basically like a sweet chai latte, like a chai tea latte, because there are a lot of cultural influences from India. India is very close, and traders have been going back and forth between India and Pakistan and Iran and the Arab Gulf and the Persian Gulf for many centuries before any of these were countries. And so there are a lot of influences from there. This is at one of the iconic cafes in Dubai called the Biker Cafe that I went to. So I was taken to one of the many cool shopping and plazas, and the only reason it looks so empty is because of COVID. And we walked through, and this is reconstructed to look like an old Arabian type village. And you'll see many of these really well-designed, well-engineered shopping and restaurant plazas throughout, certainly Dubai, but throughout the UAE. There's, of course, the ancient Jelly Belly ice cream shop that dates back to maybe a couple of years. But this is an institution. It's called Al-Fanar Seafood Restaurant. I told them I eat fish. I don't eat meat. And so we went to try some iconic Emirati foods. Of course, Emiratis either come from inland where they were Bedouins, and therefore they eat camel and goat, or they're seafaring people, and they eat a lot of fish, which I can connect to. So these are, anyone have a guess what these are? Want to even try to guess?
Bananas?
Good guess. These are fried fish egg sacks.
Oh.
Egg sacks?
Egg sacks. Waste no part of the animal, right? So they
You
will.
don't see that every day.
You don't see that every day. And they
Especially
eat,
on
yeah, right. I had to try it, of course. They promised me. By the way, I didn't even have to explain to them. They knew that we can only eat fish with scales, so they promised me not to order any fish that did not have scales on them. They are quite attuned to the rules of kashrut. For those who are like me, who will eat fish in a non-kosher restaurant, they're quite attuned. I had another friend who took me out to a sushi place and made sure to tell the waiters no shellfish for me. But we enjoyed grilled fish. Samak is fish. Lovely spice grilled fish. And majbous. Majbous is this saffron perfumed rice that they eat either with fish or with meat or with chicken. So this is the kind of the home cooking of the UAE kitchen. Of course, they had to take me for desserts. So these they call these Emirati sufganiyot, basically. And everything, all the desserts are scented. You'll find a lot of rose water, cardamom, and cinnamon. So those are the kind of the common warm, earthy flavors. This is like a pudding, different kinds of pudding, and of course coffee. And they serve coffee in these little cups, and they pour only that much. You never pour for yourself; only the host pours for you. And it's very thin. Like I said, it's heavy on the cardamom, light on the coffee, and it's actually quite pleasant. I came home with an Arabic coffee maker and special Arabic coffee. So that was, of course, but there are restaurants and cuisines at the highest levels from all over the world. Make sure to enjoy them, and make sure, like I did, to pick up dates from Batil, which is kind of the premier date shop. These are all stuffed with different kinds of nuts and candies. We've actually been having them as dessert here in my house in Israel since I got back, because they're really good. So,
hold on, can I ask you? Can I ask
please.
you a question, which I think will intersect with where you're going? Number one is, what's like? You mentioned that there's many upper middle class and affluent people. With the wealth of the Emirates overall, did they bring along their own people, or is there just an upper class? That's one question. And what's the status of the 9 million other people living in the UAE who aren't Emiratis?
That's a good way to segue into this next section that I will try to wrap up with, or the second to last section I'll try to wrap up with before we head into Q&A. So the government has been very conscious of trying to bring up the 1 million, the level of life for the 1 million citizens, as far as having a secured minimum national income. So if you don't earn over a certain level, they will make sure to give you a subsidy, free housing or heavily subsidized land for citizens. And if you can't afford certain neighborhoods, maybe you'll have to go to a working class suburb, but you will get a house, you will get an income. They'll try to get you a job. So they really work hard to make sure there is a high minimum standard of living for the 1 million citizens. But the residents also certainly enjoy the infrastructure and the high levels of bureaucracy and education and healthcare and all of these things that the UAE offers. Now, I mentioned 90% are residents, are expat workers. Some of them are, many of them are from India and from Pakistan and from South Asia and from Africa, and they are the construction workers and the hotel workers and the janitors, etc. and certainly have better lives than they would in their homes. And of course, you have many white-collar workers from literally all over the world who come there for really high standard of living and high-paying jobs, literally from all over the world. One thing that is important, and this is part of their national ethos, and they've worked really hard, there is complete freedom of religion and culture. Racism, prejudice are illegal, and they are 100% not tolerated, both legally and culturally. So it is not acceptable to say anything disparaging to anyone over their religion or the language they speak or their ethnicity. The only thing that is not tolerated is you don't openly criticize the government, you don't openly criticize the local culture. Of course, once you get to know people deeply, you can have honest political conversations with people to try to understand how they really feel about things. But that is, on a public level, it is unbelievable how they've cultivated this. And I want to show you three things that I noticed on my trips that kind of just showed this to me. Actually, there's you asked about the women. I'll also mention this. The first thing I saw on my first trip as I was driving into Dubai from the airport was a massive billboard for a car company. And this struck me. And you saw three pictures in the car company. One was a man driving the car with his wife and the kids in the back seat. Then there was a woman driving the car and the man in the driver's seat. And then there were three women driving by themselves, one in traditional clothing, one or two of them in Western clothing with their heads uncovered, driving by themselves. I don't think this was by accident. It certainly reflects something, but it also, I call this social engineering. How do you drop these kind of things throughout the country to try to build an ethos, of tolerance, of equality, of multiculturalism. Recently, they have a Ministry of Tolerance. They've had the Year of Tolerance. Tolerance as an ethos is taught as part of the school curriculum, and they speak about it very openly. So I want to show you three things that'll kind of point this out. This is the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque. Oh my God, this building is just fabulous. I was able to go tour it on this last trip. It's in Abu Dhabi. Make sure you go see it. Again, architectural marvel, opened just a few years ago. As you're coming in, so you pass the security and you're going in and you see all these pictures on the sides, and there's a picture of the Pope being given a tour of the mosque when it first opened. Okay, so they're respecting other religions, the Queen of England. And then you see these kind of words dropped here and there. So coexistence, diversity, harmony. Okay, these are things that are planted, some more obvious, some less obvious, throughout the entire country, certainly through anything official in the country. As you're touring the mosque, every single mosque, this is the national mosque of the country, and every little aspect, you read the explanations, and this, it says this is meant to highlight the multicultural aspect of the UAE. This is meant to highlight the openness and the cultural tolerance. And you see that the entire country has built and carefully constructed this national ethos, including in their main mosque, of multicultural, multi-religious tolerance. And it's really impressive, and you see the fruits of it today. I had the pleasure of visiting a new friend who is a well-known kind of intellectual and business and kind of like a nobility type figure in Dubai. And after building a private collection of religious artifacts from all over the Middle East, the government gave him an old palace to open a museum, the Crossroads of Civilization Museum. It's a wonderful little place. So I made sure to go visit them. Oh, that was not meant to be there. These are pictures from the Grand Mosque, by the way. Better than I could take. It's just, you can see it's stunning. So this is me with the gentleman, His Excellency, Mr. Ahmed Obeid al-Mansouri, in his museum that he's built up. And you can see the cousins meet up. He uses this venue, by the way, for a lot of interreligious things, a lot of Jewish Arab things, a lot of Jewish Muslim, things that aren't related to the Jewish world, as you'll see. And one of the things he did with his museum is he opened the Arab world's first Holocaust educational exhibit. And it's not huge. It's one room as part of his museum, but the symbolism of this is quite striking. To open this in the heart of the Arab world, to teach about the Holocaust to the Arab world in a very historically accurate manner. And part of the exhibit is meant to educate about Muslim countries and Muslims that helped save Jews during the Holocaust. So there's clearly an agenda here, and it's a very positive agenda. And this is not meant for the outside world. This is meant for the UAE. This is meant for travelers coming through, of which many Muslim travelers come through the UAE. So it was really beautiful to see this artifacts from Kristallnacht, teaching about what it was, and incredible. The last thing is in this part is you walk through Dubai Mall, and it's easily the most impressive, largest mall I've ever seen in my life. There are many, many malls, but it's so hot in the UAE that most of what you do, I'll say May through November, is indoors. You just can't be outdoors for more than a few minutes. And so it's malls, a lot of malls, a lot of indoor plazas. And I'm walking through this stunning mall, which has an aquarium and stores and whatever. And I run across this, and it's a bookstore. And this might not strike you as, anything special, kind of like a Barnes & Noble type large bookstore. But inside, mostly in English, but also in other languages, Arabic certainly, you will find books on politics and religion and history and literature from every angle you can imagine in the heart of the Arab world. So a part of the world that we've always considered backwards and closed and not open to critical thinking has this bookstore in the middle of it. And I thought that was, besides being a great bookstore and I can walk around it, I thought that was just such a wonderful thing. And also in the mall, you'll see things like this. You'll see every kind of Western restaurant chain. It's a very Western-friendly place, but that bookstore really, really said something to me. And walking around and seeing the kind of books in English and in Arabic that people could get a hold of and read. I've gone a little longer than I wanted, but I want to talk about the Abraham Accords, which I think it's important. And I still see our guest has not logged on. Al-Anoud, if you are on and you can hear me, let's get you up here in a second. So we talked about, I won't go back on this, but we talked about the free zones and how the UAE has built itself up. By the way, based on this culture of tolerance, it invites foreigners, it invites investors, it invites foreign businesses and the people who work in those businesses to want to set up. It's become one of the major financial and logistics hubs of the world. It's going to compete. It already is competing with the likes of Hong Kong and Singapore for one of the major hubs. And it's by no accident. It's designed the infrastructure, the culture, and the ecosystem in order to build this up. We talked about free zones, startup hubs, and all the laws and culture that go around with it to invite people. I've tried to unpack the Uae Formula. I'll share you my version of it. And it's a combination of having a vision, long-term vision, a commitment to excellence in everything they do, investment in the future, true pragmatism, get the best where you can get it, even if it's not yours, and develop your own in the meantime, openness to outside expertise and knowledge, creativity to be able to try to think on your own and work with those who might know and try to develop that, and leadership to be able to bring all this together in 30 seconds. That's my kind of trying to put the formula of their success on the UAE. There is a Jewish community. There is a small, but hopefully it'll be growing now that we've signed the Abraham Accords. Less than 1,000 people, although there might be more who are not affiliated with the Jewish community. Most of them in the UAE are from English-speaking countries, but people who until recently were not so open about their being Jewish, and now they're able to be more open about this. The new rabbi, for those of you who are from New York, is Rabbi Eliabadi. And there is, of course, like any good Jewish community.
A very nice guy.
Very nice guy. Got to meet him this last time. And of course, like any Jewish community, there's a competing Chabad breakaway community. Because you have to have that. Of course, we don't always talk about Bahrain, and this is not a Bahrain trip, but there's actually a small indigenous Jewish community, very small, but indigenous Jewish community in Bahrain of Iraqi Jews that have been there for over 150 years. This is under construction now. This is one of these visions of tolerance and coexistence and religious harmony, and it will be the Abrahamic Center. And it's being built right now in Abu Dhabi, and it's going to be a synagogue, a mosque, and a church in one stunning complex that they are designing as we speak. Of course, they've already established the Association of Gulf Jewish Communities, or the Beit Din of Arabia. Most of the other countries in the Arab Gulf have much, much smaller expat Jewish communities, but things are happening. This is, and this was my actually very first experience in the UAE. I went to the UAE's first kosher restaurant, the Arab world's first kosher restaurant, to have a kosher dinner with 3 traditional Muslim Arab friends. And I brought them soccer jerseys from Israel. And it was one of the most beautiful moments is when I went to go do Netilat Yadayim, and my friend here, Thani, joined me. And then I sat with my 3 friends and we said Hamotzi together in the heart of the Arab world at a kosher restaurant. And it's one of these moments that you have to pinch yourself because how can this be real? Since then, more kosher restaurants are opening, caterers, Jewish life, I think, both for tourism and for locals is going to grow. This is, of course, getting to meet Rabbi Eliabadi as he tries to build up the Jewish community. And they're already doing many public events, candle lightings for Hanukkah. This is the Chabad community, and Jewish life little by little. Almost last thing, and I hope I see the numbers are still high, so I hope people are still interested. I'll keep going here. I want to talk very quickly about the Abraham Accords. So the Abraham Accords are the full normalization between Israel and the UAE and Israel and Bahrain. It is orchestrated by the UAE, an opportunity fully seized by the previous administrations in the US and in Israel. And it was part of a regional package. Israel halts its annexation plans of the West Bank. This seems like ancient history already, but that's what was on the table. That Israel was going to do that with some kind of partial green light from the Trump administration. And in exchange, that was part of the deal. And in exchange, the U.S. Supposedly, although not officially, would give an upgraded arms package to the UAE. It led to the immediate and very warm, and I was shocked by this, normalization, diplomatic, economic, cultural, tourism of relations between the 2 countries. I think that the Accords fundamentally changed the region and have ended the Arab-Israeli conflict, and no less than that. The Arab-Israeli conflict is officially over. It is the now Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We can argue that that's what it always was, but the signing of these accords, the public aspect of these relationships have ended the Arab-Israeli conflict for good. I think we talked about MBZ earlier in his great vision for the region. I think what he wanted to do was he realized that boycotting Israel and isolating Israel diplomatically was not helping anybody, and that you can influence a lot more as their friend than you can as an enemy or as an outside neutral actor. Of course, the UAE has had secret and quiet relations with Israel for many, many years that have grown slightly and increasingly more public, but now they are fully public and they're fully open. And as we saw, very interestingly, in the violence of a few weeks ago with Gaza, they held strong because, with no other country in the world, do you end relations because that country entered a military skirmish or had a spat with one of its neighbors? And the UAE realized it can influence us and the Palestinians a lot more if it's engaged, and it seems to be working. The economic benefits have been astounding already, and they're just starting. And again, this is during COVID when people are not really fully traveling, but we're talking about a billion shekels in bilateral trade investments just in the first few months. What the 2 key things that I'm going to point out here is Israel is recognized as the startup hub. The UAE is recognized as the, how would I call it? They know how to scale things. They know how to implement visions. So we're very good at coming up with the tech and the ideas, but we're not so good at implementing them in our country. For those of you who I'm sure know Israel very well, they're very good at implementing. And it's also the logistical and financial gateway to a massive part of the world, 3 billion people in the world, in South Asia, the Middle East, East Africa, that we didn't really have access to before. We've always been kind of Western focused, Europe and the US, and this could change Israel's orientation as far as business. This is the organization I helped found, the UAE-Israel Business Council, which is trying to help normalization through building, the kind of ties that promote trade, innovation, cooperation. I talked about this. I want to skip this for a second. I just want to say there's a new Middle East that's forming. I said the Arab-Israeli conflict is over practically, and a new coalition, a new alignment in the region is forming, in which the moderate Sunni states, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, who already had peace treaties with Egypt, Sudan, who agreed, and Morocco over here. Add to that countries that are outside of the region, but touch on it, Greece and India have formed into a bloc of moderate, responsible, forward-thinking, internationally minded countries who are commonly working together across security challenges, across infrastructure challenges, to sharing gas and energy against the Iran-led radical axis and against the radical Sunni axis led by Turkey and Qatar. The last kind of thing I want to talk about here is the cultural normalization that, over 130,000 Israelis have already visited the UAE, and that's during Corona. And one of the things that we haven't, because tourism hasn't quite opened up yet here in Israel, we haven't seen too many delegations coming here. There was one, and this was actually before I started working with Sharaka, but this was brought by the Sharaka organization to Israel. This is Sharaka. I'll leave their details at the end. There are many things that I can now say that we can offer all of your communities. But if this is looking to build on people-to-people ties between Israel and the Gulf, and through that to Israel and the Arab world. We've seen joint candle lightings between the ambassadors of the different countries. That's in the UK. Statements, powerful statements that have reverberated across the Middle East. Making new friends. Okay, this is when the delegation came to Israel. The delegation lit at the Kotel Hanukkah candles. This was unbelievable. This was, by the way, all over Israeli news. It was such a powerful statement to see our new Emirati and Bahraini friends in their traditional clothes with the chief rabbi of the Kotel lighting Hanukkah candles during Hanukkah. These are unbelievable moments. I mean, I think everyone I know in this country was welling up with tears as we saw these pictures. These people are all my friends now, by the way, and I'm working now with some of them. That's with the president and previously the Knesset. This is something I did on the podcast, which you'll get to see a different version of the podcast. We did a Jewanced live with some of my Emirati friends to get to meet them, to get to know who they are and to get to know their culture. Did a couple of these already. And this is the Sharaka group after it visited Yad Vashem. This was unbelievable. They visited Yad Vashem, and then they made a public commitment in Arabic and in English that they will always stand by the Jewish people and they will never again let something like this happen to the Jewish people. I'm actually even getting a little emotional as I say this now. It was so powerful. I talked to them afterwards, and it was so genuine, their emotions and their sympathies of what they learned and how they internalized it. And they quickly went and they organized the Arab world's first virtual Holocaust memorial education event with people from all over the Middle East came together to learn about the Holocaust and how to bring Holocaust education to the Arab world. And these are the kind of things that come out of this. There is some tourism stuff, but I think we've run long on time, Charlie. What do you think?
I think we've run a little bit long on time, and there's some really important questions. I think we have enough. We have enough for you to come back to a whole other presentation. Let me ask you. There's been some comments in the chat. You know what? If you want to leave on that picture of like the Dubai frame, I love that picture.
Yeah, I'll scroll through these as you talk, just so people can see.
So about the political situation in Dubai. That on the one hand, it's an open society, and then on the other, the Emiratis, it's a what do you call it? Monarchy. And so what's the truth in terms, there's really beautiful, like rhetoric that you've or vision that you've shared with us, where when like the rubber meets the road, when there's a conflict between an Emirati and a foreigner, how open, how democratic is the society?
So they're not a democracy, and they never claim to be. They are a modern country. They do have an advanced system of law and rule of law and institutions and courts and police and investigations, et cetera. It is not like a lot of countries where I think you need to be, it's not arbitrary in that sense, but they never claim to be a democracy in the Western sense of the word. So, like I said, culturally, it's very open. Religiously, it's very open. As far as private property rights, again, things that you won't see in a lot of developing parts of the world. This is not a developing country. It is very much a first world developed country in that sense, but it's not a democracy, and it never claims to be. It's an autocracy. It's a monarchy. That has its own rules and regulations. I don't know how to answer exactly that question. I will just say that I think, they've developed in their own way. The people I talk to seem to be happy, very happy with this form of government. And maybe it's because all their needs are very much met in a very efficient way. And they seem to be well aware of how lucky they are that they were blessed with we'll call it a benevolent autocracy. And I think that's something that, autocracies can be either really good or really bad. So if you have a benevolent one that gives you a very high quality of life and gives you all the personal freedoms that you want, then that's something that you have to be aware of and thankful for, when around the world, and certainly around the region, there are many not so benevolent, there are many inept, there are many corrupt autocracies that don't give the people their needs or their personal freedoms. And so is everything perfect? Probably not. Are the people aware of it? I think they are aware of it, and they're also aware very much of what it is they have.
Let me ask you one last tough question, and then I'll end with a softball.
That's the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, by the way.
And absolutely beautiful. And again, we have to go back. And
Sure.
The best thing would be one day to go with you and meet your friend. You mentioned with the recent Abraham Accords, this vision that the UAE, Bahrain joining in a peace agreement with Israel would help with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So how did the recent Palestinian-Israeli conflict affect the relationship between Israel and the UAE?
So I think what they intended to do, and that's the UAE, and to a lesser extent Bahrain, because Bahrain is just a much smaller country, but I think what they intended to do, they're trying to take over as the leaders, the positive leaders, the moderate leaders of this region. They realized that the current dynamic between Israel and the Palestinians was going nowhere. In fact, it was, Israel was mulling annexation of parts of the West Bank, which would have officially ended the possibility of a two-state solution. And well, I don't think Israel was going to go through with it, by the way, but that's what was the rhetoric. That's what was on the table. There was a green light to an extent from the Trump administration, and they saw an opportunity. How do you expand your influence to be able to have more of a say in what happens here? Now, what happened initially is they gained an instant foothold in Israel and Israeli society. Israeli society, and of course, my understanding is that this crowd is a crowd that understands Israel pretty well. Israeli society has been scarred by the Arab and Muslim world for a long time. That we are not in the 90s, early 2000s peace era. We are in an era that has been scarred by terrorism, scarred by Iran, scarred by civil wars and instability around us. And so, you need to build trust. And I think they realized you need to build trust with these people, with Israel. How do you do that? Normalizing with them. Realize you're not going anywhere. You're not trying to trick them. You're not trying to, I don't know, pull one over them. Just get them to make concessions like Israelis did in the past. So their move already opened a new line of thinking within Israel. I think that Israelis are going to be much more willing to consider that there are positive elements in the Arab world, that there are parts of the Arab world that accept Israel's place in the region as a Jewish state. It's no secret that it's called the Abraham Accords, okay? Rather than, the peace with Egypt and Jordan, for example, is very cold. And I don't think they never educated their people for peace with Israel. They educated their people that the war was just harmful. But that's a difference between lack of war and peace. There's a difference between educating your people that the Jews are indigenous to the region, that they are also the children of Abraham. And that's what they did with the Abraham Accords. Everything has a level of symbolism to it. Regarding the Palestinians, they initially, and by the way, they've been the funders of the Palestinian Authority for a long time. There are many Palestinian expats. They used to pay a Palestine tax anytime they bought anything. The tax would go to help fund Palestinian refugees. And when they initially signed the Abraham Accords, the Palestinians saw it as a stab in the back. And the rhetoric on social media and from the Palestinian street and from official Palestinians towards the UAE was vicious. And they were really hurt by it. They said to me, we've been funding these people for so long, and now they just, spit in our face and turn away. But they're not abandoning the Palestinian cause. They're just trying to find a more pragmatic way to solve it by engaging with both sides instead of only engaging with one side. What I think they realize now is that they know better who we are. They can influence us better. I think, my guess is they might even try to influence who the next Palestinian leadership will be and try to work with both of us as from a place of within diplomatic relations rather than from outside to try to push for a pragmatic end to this conflict. So much mistrust has been built up over the years that you need new partners to come in and try to help re-bridge that gap that's been created.
So one last thing, can you put your email in the chat for everybody? I think you have the ability to do that, right?
Yeah, actually, I'll show this. So the new organization I'm working with is Sharaka NGO, and it is meant to build on the Abraham Accords on a people-to-people level. We do three main things, and please reach out to us. Say you saw me on this. We can help you bring delegations if you want to the UAE. If we're going to be bringing delegations to the United States, so if you want to host us, please reach out. We'll be organizing dialogues, events, speaking engagements, and we will be happy to help facilitate joint projects between Israel, between Jewish communities, and between Arab communities around the Gulf, and hopefully soon Morocco and other places in the region. So sharaka.ngo.com. And for me, you can check me out on my website, danfeferman.com. And my email is on the website. My Facebook, you can follow me, my Twitter account, and my website. Please register, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Fantastic. Well, listen,
I see that our guest did not join us, and I hope everything is okay with her because yesterday she did say she would join us, but I apologize for that. We'll have to do another event with her.
I think we have to have you back in. There was a lot to cover, and we just on behalf of CSP, I want to thank you for a wonderful virtual tour. I mean, there's just so much richness in the material that you covered. I know it was a lot to cover in a short amount of time, and you did an amazing job. And I want to thank everyone for being here today. Remember, we have programming on Monday and 2 programs on Tuesday, as well as a program on Thursday. And our next, our upcoming travel program will be taking place on July 27th. And we'll have a chance to meet with Dan again on July 14th, which is a Wednesday. We hope everyone has a wonderful Father's Day. And if you remember, send a happy birthday email to Ari Katz. We wish him all the best. We hope he has an amazing birthday. And I wish everyone a happy Father's Day. And looking forward to seeing you all soon. All right, take care.
Thanks so much, and take care, everybody.
Great.
Take care.
And
Great.
I hope to hear from you. I hope you be in touch, whether with me directly or whether through Sharaka. Lots of events, lots of delegations, speakers that we want to bring this summer already to the United States. And so if you want to host us in your community, delegations of Emiratis and Israeli Arabs and Palestinians who are going to be coming together to talk about the new Middle East. If you want to come to the UAE through us and get a kind of behind the scenes tour of the experiences and people and places that I've mentioned, feel free to reach out. And if you want to invite me for other talks, Israeli politics, the Middle East, the Jewish world, you're welcome to reach out to me on my website. Thanks so much,
All right, everybody. Thanks. Have a great day.